welcome to the Event Answer Studio. Today I want to show you how to create this Chiara arch from foam board. It's a beautiful statement piece for your next party or event, but you don't need any woodworking tools or skills to make it. So follow along and I'll show you how to build the arch and how to put together this garland that goes on top. To make the arch, I'm using a single piece of foam board that's 40 inches wide by 60 inches tall, which is the final dimensions of the arch itself. Hobby Lobby is selling this size in store now, so you don't have to buy an entire case of these off of Amazon. Now, if you can't get your hands on a foam board this large, you can buy two 32 by 40 foam boards and put the long sides together and run a piece of clear packaging tape along the entire seam on the back side, and that will work just as well. When you're picking out your foam boards, you want to pick ones that aren't dinged up or warped. Now, foam board is light and inexpensive compared to wood, but it does damage really easily. So when you're purchasing your boards, you want to pick one that has at least two corners that aren't dinged up, because those will be the two bottom corners of our finished arch. To make this arch project as easy to follow along with as possible, I created this printable template, which is linked in the description box below. You can just download this template and print it out on your home printer on 8.5 by 11 inch papers, cut along the dotted lines, and then tape them all together. The two most important things to keep in mind while assembling the template is we want all those vertical lines to be nice and straight, and then anywhere the lines of the arch cross over the edges of the pages, we want to make sure we tape down all of those seams, so that way when we cut along the template, those aren't flapping around. Once the template is assembled, we need to cut along the outside edge of the entire template, because the bottom and sides of our template are going to be right up against the edges of our foam board. I'll be taping the outside edges of the template to the foam board, but that means the center of our template might shimmy around a little bit as we're cutting out these arches. So I'm going to cut 3 squares in the sections that are already going to be cut out eventually, so we can tape the template down in those spots directly to the foam core. Now these are going to be marked in the final template, so you'll see exactly where you should put these holes and lay the tape. Now we can lay the template right on top of the foam board, making sure we align the bottom and at least one side of the template with the edge of the foam board. Then secure the template in place with a piece of tape along the entire outside edge of the template every couple inches. Also tape across the 3 boxes we cut out, making sure that tape touches both the template and the foam board. To cut out the arch, you'll need a self-healing mat that we can put underneath the foam board to protect all of our work surfaces. In addition to the mat, you'll also want a craft or hobby knife with a brand new blade in it so we don't tear up our foam board edges as we cut it out. I'm also using a clear ruler to help me get straight, crisp cuts along the edge of the template. Now you could always freehand this, but I feel like this gives me a really nice edge on my cuts. Now when I'm cutting out the foam board, I'm going to start by cutting out the center parts of the template and working my way out to the edges. That way my template, which is taped at the edges, is less likely to shimmy around as I make my cuts. Whenever I'm cutting out foam board, I like to make each cut in 2 passes. So the first pass, I'll go about halfway through the foam board and then go back and repeat that exact stroke, only pressing down all the way through that back paper of the foam board. And this gives me a really clean cut. Sometimes when you brute force your way through foam board, it can rumple up and tear the foam inner part. So by taking it in 2 cuts, it's more likely to give me a nice clean edge. As I cut free each section of the arch, I like to remove those pieces of foam core. Not only does this let me know that I've completely cut that free, but it also makes it much easier to see my cutting mat underneath the foam board, and I'm less likely to accidentally cut a place where the mat isn't. Now don't throw away any of those narrow vertical pieces, because we'll use those scrap bits of foam core as supports on the back side of the arch later on. I won't bore you with even more footage of me cutting out foam core, but in the top right corner you can see that large centerpiece of the arch that I cut out first. There are actually 2 triangles drawn in the center of that, and we need to cut those out because those are our back support flaps that will make this arch stand up nice and tall. With everything cut out, the individual arches themselves are actually fairly floppy and won't stand up on their own. But if we tie them together with some of these scrap pieces that we cut off earlier, they'll be plenty strong enough to stand on their own. So from those scrap pieces, I cut 2 12-inch long sections that we can use as supports. I measured 36 inches from the base of the arch and made a mark on the outermost arch and the innermost arch on the back side of my foam board. This will leave enough room for the support flaps to be attached later on, and it'll act as a guide for my scrap pieces so both of them are attached nice and level. I aligned my foam core on those 2 marks and then centered it in the back of the arch. I'm just going to flip it over and apply a little bit of hot glue right where that foam board is behind each of those arches so it won't be peeking through. Then just reapply it and hold it in place for a couple seconds until that hot glue has a chance to set. I'll repeat this process on the other side of the arch so I have one support on both the left and the right side of my arch. You could always leave your arches the natural white of the foam board, but I want to color match mine to the balloons. So I'm using this blue satin spray paint and I'm going to apply that in 2 light coats. Whenever you're painting foam board, you want to pay particular attention to how much moisture you're adding on top of that foam board, because if it's too wet, your foam board could either warp or bubble up, ruining your piece. So apply the paint in light layers, slowly building up your colors. Remember that all of the cut edges of the foam board are white as well, so I'm going to angle my spray paint can down near the piece and get all of the outside and inside edges of my arch, as well as the support pieces, covered in a nice even layer of paint. I was able to apply 2 coats to the front and all the edges of my arch using this single can of spray paint. Now, because my arch setup is against a wall, I didn't feel that it was necessary to paint the back side of the arch as well, but if you're going to be setting this up anywhere where people might be able to see the back side of your arch, you may want to go ahead and spray paint it as well. So once I've got everything coated, I'm going to set it aside to dry and we can start working on building the balloon garland that accompanies it. I'll be using 16 navy, Caribbean blue, dark blue, and lime green 11-inch balloons for the main body of this garland, and I'll be inflating all of those with my electric balloon inflator. To speed up the inflation process, I'm going to fill my balloons 2 at a time, 1 on each of the nozzles. And I'm going to fill them till they're almost their full size, and then slowly let some air out of them so that the balloons end up being anywhere between 7 inches and 10 inches in diameter. Then we're going to tie these into a pair by overlapping the nozzles, wrapping them around twice, and tying them together in a simple knot. I'm going to repeat these steps so all of my 11-inch balloons are tied into pairs of varying sizes. Now we're going to bring those together into clusters. So I'm going to take 2 pairs and overlap them so that the nozzles touch in the center, and then wrap 1 balloon from each pair around each other, locking them together into a quad. I'm going to make 1 quad in each color, and then I'm going to make 2 6-balloon clusters in each color. So to make a 6-balloon cluster, you're going to take 2 pairs, bring them together into a quad, and then add 1 more pair to that so that the nozzles of the new pair and the nozzles of the quad are all touching, and then take the 2 balloons you just added, wrap them all the way around and twist them around each other, and that will lock them into a cluster of 6 balloons. Then repeat this step so you've got 2 clusters in each of the colors. To accent the garland, I'll be using 6 5-inch balloons in each of my colors, plus I'll have 2 260 balloons that I've cut in half to tie these into mini clusters. Now I'm going to inflate each of these 5-inch balloons with 3 pumps of air from my hand pump. I'm going to wrap the nozzle of the first balloon underneath one of my fingers that's holding onto the hand pump and hold it while I inflate a second 5-inch balloon with 3 pumps of air. Once I've got both of those filled, I'm going to press them down against the table so that they're nice and round before tying them together into a pair, just like we did with the larger balloons. Now if you're not comfortable inflating 2 of these at a time, you can always inflate 1, tie it in a knot before bringing them together into pairs. Now I'm going to repeat this so I've got 3 pairs in each of my colors, and then I'm going to tie them together into mini clusters. So I'm going to take 2 of those pairs, overlap them, and twist them around each other to make a quad. Then I'm going to have my quad and my pair tied together with one of the pieces of 260 balloon we cut apart earlier. Tie one end of that 260 balloon around the nozzles of your singular pair with a simple knot. Once you've pulled it nice and taut, then take the other end of that 260 balloon and tie it around the nozzles of the quad. Now you could also tie a knot here, or if you take your fingers and pinch them around the nozzles of the quad, and then grab the end of that 260, pull the 260 tight, and then wrap it in a figure 8 pattern around a couple of those balloons, it'll also secure the balloon in place. So having a quad on one side and a pair on the other will give us an interesting cluster to add into our garland. So go ahead and repeat these steps with each color in the 5-inch balloons so you've got 4 of these little clusters. Let's tie all the clusters together into our garland. So I'm going to secure them together using an empty 260, but you could always use curling ribbon or fishing line if you prefer to use that method. So first of all, I'm going to secure the end of this balloon to the nozzles of my first cluster by pinching the 260 against the nozzles of the cluster, stretching it tight, and wrapping it in a figure 8 pattern around a couple of those balloons. Now I'm going to take my next cluster and nestle it right up against the first one, and then I'm going to stretch that 260 across the new cluster, making sure it's touching the nozzles of the new cluster, and then wrap it in a figure 8 pattern around 2 of the balloons in that cluster. Now I'm going to continue to add clusters in the same way, making sure that I mix up my size and color combinations so it looks nice and organic. So I've got a couple of 6 balloon clusters, and then I'm going to add the dark blue quad right up against the dark blue cluster, and this will give me a larger blue section next to the other ones. I'm going to tie all my balloons together in this manner, except for the navy cluster and the navy quad. I'm going to attach those two together in a separate mini cluster so that those can look like they're coming out of the center of my Chiara arch, while the rest of these balloons are going to go along the side. Now once you get to the end of your 260 balloon and you need a little bit more, you can just tie a new one onto the end and keep adding balloons. Once you've got all the balloons tied together, you can then take the remaining 260 tail and then just wrap it in a figure 8 pattern a couple more times around the last cluster and then let it go, and it will disappear down into the balloons. Now that the paint is dry on our arch, we can finally attach the flaps that will support our arch. I'm going to center the flap on the middle arch before we secure it. Now you could either use hot glue for a permanent attachment, or I like to use clear packaging tape because I can put tape on one side of this flap, and that'll make it so that I can fold down these flaps for easy transportation and storage. Now it's totally up to you which approach you'd like to take, but for today's setup, I'm going to be using clear tape. Stand the flap up on the back side of the arch, making sure the base of the flap and the base of the arch are aligned with each other. Then take a piece of tape and tape it along the inside edge of that flap, making sure the tape gets right down into the corner, and then repeat this up at the top of the triangle and then one more time in the middle, and this will hold the flap in place but allow it to fold down for easy storage. I attached the second flap in the same way, and this is what it looks like from the back side. The flaps offer just enough support that allows the arch to freestand, but because we're going to be putting balloons on this and pushing on it a little bit, I did end up taping the flaps as well as the arch to the floor, and that way I could add a little bit of pressure without it scooching around. So once you've got it placed exactly where you want and taped to the floor, we can now add our balloon garland. So I'm going to nestle this right up against the side of my arch, and wherever the garland is touching the arch, I'm going to spread the balloons apart and press the side of the arch into the gap that I create, and the tension between the two balloons on the front and the back of that arch will hold the garland in place. So all the way up and down the side of that garland, I'm going to spread the balloons apart and insert the arch. If you're using this for an indoor party, this would be more than enough to hold the balloons in place, but if you were worried about anyone bumping into this, you could always tie the balloons to the arch with an empty 260 or some string. To give the illusion that my balloons are wrapping through the center of the arch and up the side, I've got this separate mini cluster that I made ahead of time, and I'm going to slip the balloons very carefully through the center of the arch and then press them down over the edge of the foam core just like we did on the outside. Then I'm going to arrange the balloon clusters so that they're touching and it looks like they're all one piece. And to help bridge that gap, I'm going to use one of the mini clusters in the dark blue to unite the two pieces. So to attach a cluster, what you want to do is pick where you want the cluster to be and then slip the 260 underneath one of the balloons near where you want the cluster to be, making sure that that 260 is tucked in nice and tight, and then you can just arrange the little balloons however you want. And because we're not using any adhesives, all these balloons can be rotated around until they're sitting exactly how you want them. So I'm going to go ahead and add the rest of the mini clusters anywhere where I think I need a little bit more texture and interest. Once I've got all 4 of those on, this backdrop is ready for a party. A foam board arch is a great solution if you need a quick, lightweight backdrop for 1 or 2 parties. And though it may not be as rigid as a wooden version, it still allows you to get that arch aesthetic for your party or event, all from supplies you can find at your local craft store. If you enjoyed today's project, boop that like button and subscribe below so you don't miss out on the party props I'm making next.